Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again on Itamar. I'm sorry that we're getting this lesson out a bit late. Right now it's Sunday night, believe it or not. I tried to get a lesson out on Friday, had some technical problems. I would like to get a small message out for my viewers because it's so important that we continue our Torah lessons throughout the week, and just saying hello to you all, that I just love you all so much. Just want to get a message out there to our listeners and watchers, our observers, our participators in our Torah lessons. This week's portion is called Yitro, which is an amazing portion, like every other portion of the Torah is, of course. There's so much to learn about. The question at hand, which right away stands out, is why does Yitro merit having a portion named after him? Even Abraham, the great giant of Israel, doesn't have a portion named after him. There are portions that deal with Abraham, deal with a lot of people, but Yitro, again a Gentile, merits in a portion being named after him. And what, of course, was the cause? Why did he merit such a great thing? I think we can add to a little bit flavor to this question by opening the first verse of this week's portion, as it says, "Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midyan Choten Moshe." Yitro heard the Kohen Midyan. He was a Midianite priest, right, from Midyan, the father-in-law of Moshe Rabbeinu. So in the same verse, Torah describes Yitro as being a Midianite priest, on the other hand being the father-in-law of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's a little weird. Moshe Rabbeinu, the greatest prophet of all time, the husband of Yitro's daughter, Tzipporah, and here his father-in-law is a Midianite priest. How does that go? An idol worship, in other words. How does that go together? What is the Torah trying to teach us? Vayishma Yitro, and Yitro heard this Midianite priest, the father-in-law of Moshe Rabbeinu. Wow, it doesn't seem to be compatible at all. And the answer is yes, it's very compatible. And the question is why? Is that God is teaching us such a powerful lesson. Who was Yitro? Yitro was a soul search. He was searching the truth in this world. He wasn't lacking anything. I mean, rabbis say he was a brilliant man. He was a great scholar, and he went around and studied religion. He was a theologian, studying every religion under the sun. There wasn't a religion that he didn't worship. He worshipped every type of idol worship there was. He was an expert in it. But he never felt, again, complacent. He never felt he was in the right direction. Although he had nothing to lose. He had a huge following. He was a great man. But he was really searching the truth. And only when he found the truth in monotheism, in turning to the Torah, turning to the Jewish people, turning to Judaism, is when he actually found himself in this world. And God is saying, listen, you could be this idol-worshipping priest so far away from Torah, but I'm not closing the door on you, because if you really look into your heart and you really feel that you're looking to find God, you can make a change in your life and turn yourself around. Although you were really in the pit, in the lowest place on earth, you can reach the highest point on earth. And that's what we learn from Yitro. Well, he was this priest, he was worshipping idols, the furthest away he can get from God, but he turned himself around because he was so modest, because he was able to give all that up. He gave his whole life career up as being this doctor of religion, of idol worship. And he said, I'm going to be subservient, I'm just going to be a humble man and humble myself before the people of Israel and learn from them. And that's what he did, Yitro. He came and he turned to monotheism. And he turned to God. And God is saying, in your merit, I'm going to name a portion after you. And he was named Yitro. Now I'm going to name a portion after you. He merited having his daughter Tzipporah marry Moses, which was an amazing thing in itself. And that's a lesson for anyone. I mean, there are people out there over the world that are seeking, searching the truth in this world. And there are Yitros, so many Yitros out there. And God is saying, I'm inviting you all to come and return to me. And if you might have gone far away, but if you truly search and you're truly looking for the truth, you will find that truth. And that is the great story behind Yitro. So this amazing personality. As a matter of fact, I can tell you a story. Just yesterday, I was in the synagogue praying, and it was Friday night. I was praying. After prayer was over, a friend of mine comes over to me, and he says to me, "Where is the Gabbai? You know, Gabbai is the one who arranges in the morning who's going to go get an aliyah, who's going to go to the Torah to read from the Torah. We know there are 7 on Shabbat. We have a custom to read from the Torah. 7 people are called up to the Torah, and they read different portions of the Torah, right, of the portion of the week. And as something called the mafter. The mafter is the last person called up, who reads a little section and reads the prophet. So this guy says to me, where is the Gabbai? I'd like to ask him if I could read the prophet of tomorrow. And I said, why? It's your birthday? Because usually when someone reads the prophet, the mafter, it's usually a birthday or a special reason that he's called up to the mafter. Like a chatan, for example, a groom would be called up, someone getting married would be called up to read his portion, etc. So I said right away, why? It's your birthday? And he gives me an ear-to-ear smile, and I'm looking at him. I said, oh my goodness, I'm so stupid. I'm looking, what is the name of this guy? His name is Yitro. He's called Jethro, that's his name, Yitro. He would say this is his portion because he's connected to Yitro. Why? This guy, he was born in Australia. Amazing story. He converted to Judaism. Before he converted, he was studying philosophy and religion. He studied every religion under the sun himself. And his life story, he looks at himself almost as a reincarnation of Yitro. There are so many reincarnations of Yitro in this world because so many people go through this path until they find themselves. So he's really an amazing, amazing person. And anyway, so Yitro is not only this one particular biblical version, but there are so many people that can identify with that story of looking and searching in this world and finding themselves in this world. And that's what's behind, I think, the first opening verse, which is telling us. Not only that, our rabbis have two interesting approaches in defining when did Yitro come. Did Yitro come before the giving of the Torah, right? After he heard what seems to be, this verse seems to be in a way, what did he hear? He heard us coming out of Egypt, and that's what made him turn to monotheism, return to the Jewish people. And we see it, of course, in this verse. We look at verse number 11 in chapter 18 here. What does it say? Ata yadati, now I know, ki gadol Hashem mikol elohim, God is greater than all the gods. Ki b'davar asher zadu aleim. Why? Because God works in measure for measure, and the Egyptians had this whole plan, throwing the Jewish babies, into the sea, into the Niles, all we know, and they were all punished the same way. They were all turned around against them. But anyway, Yitro here accepts again the yoke of heaven, and the fact that he accepted upon himself the yoke of heaven in this week's portion here, right, it's very clear. It's a proof. It's right out. We see that he says God is greater than anyone else. So we see right here that he is accepting the belief in God. And the question that I have, the question at hand, is that what motivated Yitro to actually make that change? What caused within his heart to make that change? We know that he was looking for the truth, as I said before. So our rabbis bring down two interesting explanations. One, they say he heard the story of the great miracles of Yam Suf, of the Jewish people leaving Egypt, and the Egyptians drowned in the sea, and the miracles of the different plagues that took place. And this is what brought him to return to Judaism, to come to the monotheism, right, to Judaism. Another opinion is that the Torah, after this particular portion happened, he came to Moses only after we already received Torah, which means that's really what brought him to be attracted to the Jewish people through the Torah. The giving of the Torah on Sinai, that great event of the Torah, is what brought Yitro. And this takes place after already of that event. So it's not chronological. If according to that opinion, doesn't go according to the chronological order, but it happened after the Torah was given. So if we look, a lot of times when our rabbis give two different opinions of the Midrash, it's not like there's one right opinion, because it's impossible that they're both right in one hand, because whether he either came before or he came after, right? How can they both be right? But the deep way of looking into a Midrash is what is the message they're trying to give us behind. And Yitro, again, that's mentioned in the Bible here, as I said before, it's the biblical Yitro, but again, this life story is connected to millions and millions of people that have the same questions and the same doubts and the same searchings to try to find their way in life and find spirituality. And therefore, the rabbis are teaching us two different approaches. There are those that are attracted and become involved and connected to to Judaism, to monotheism, right? To the Torah, through what? Through the fact that they look into God's people in this world, the Jewish nation of Israel, and they see the miraculous happenings that took place. It has nothing to do, doesn't have particularly to do with the Torah itself. But they're looking at the Jewish people saying, wow, here's a nation that's a slave nation, and God took them out of Egypt. All these amazing miracles took place. Look what happened in the sea, the Red Sea, and here he's bringing them out through the desert and leading them, of course, to the Promised Land. So the people looking at the people of Israel as a great nation that's been saved, although it seems to go against all odds. But how This nation has survived throughout history, and that's what attracts a lot of the people, the Gentile, the non-Jews, to say, wait a second, there's something great in this people. They're definitely God's people. I see that God is redeeming them. And not necessarily, particularly, they're studying the depth of the Torah, but this, in the general sense, they're attracted to the amazing way God is leading this nation and redeeming his people. And that's, according to the Midrash explanation, that Yitro came before the Torah was given, which means it didn't necessarily have to do with the actual Torah itself. I'm talking about the details of the Torah, the teachings, but on the general sense of the Torah, which means following the nation, looking at the, as we call the treasure, the chosen people of Israel. That was so attractive, and that's what brought him to the understanding there's a God in the world, by looking at his people. On the other hand, there's another approach. A lot of people come to Judaism because they see the beautiful wisdom and the amazing wisdom within the Torah. The Torah is the greatest source of wisdom and knowledge in the world. It's God's word. So many people attracted to turn to the Judaism through understanding that there's one God in this world through the greatness of the Torah. When they really start to study Torah and see how great the Torah is and how it's connected to them and how can it make an impact on them, that is what attracted. So that's according to the opinion. It says Yitro came after the Torah was given. That's really what made a difference within him. And of course they're both right, because there are those that are brought back, leave the idolatrous ways by looking at the nation of Israel and following their path. There are others that come through looking through the great Torah and the wisdom of the Torah, and both, of course, are correct, depending on what generation or who we're talking about, which individuals. That's really the deep message behind this concept. Yitro came before Matan Torah, or he came after the receiving of Torah. That's another insight which I wanted to mention. One other thing I think we have to focus on is the advice. We think about it. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest prophet of all time. There was no one like him. And what does Moshe Rabbeinu need? What does he need? Is father to come on, listen, guy, you're working too hard. You got to divide the work up. You can't judge everybody. Just take the big cases and let other courts deal with the smaller situations. And when they can't deal with it, they'll call you. Moshe Rabbeinu was such a brilliant man, a great prophet. What did he need this kind of advice? He couldn't think of it himself. This idea, of course, was an important idea. I'm not taking anything away from Yitro, God forbid. But why could Moshe Rabbeinu come up with such an idea? And the truth is, of course, he probably thought about it. But why did Moshe Rabbeinu want to do it for? And the answer is because he was so, Moshe Rabbeinu, as the greatest prophet who ever lived, his love for every soul. What made him such a great prophet was his love for his people. And he couldn't see any kind of case, whether it's a large or small situation, when people were arguing, had a dispute amongst each other, or didn't understand what to do. He wanted to be involved in their personal lives and help them as much as he can. And he just couldn't break away. He couldn't say no. And it was his father-in-law who came over and was able to give him the push and the nudge to convince him, listen, you're going to fall apart. You have to do it. And he convinced him to do it. So it was Yitro who got the merit of really convincing Moshe Rabbeinu to do something that was so logical that he probably thought about, but he couldn't do it because it wasn't in his nature to say no and to pull away. And he needed that nudge. And that's really the great merit of Yitro, that was able to worry about Moshe Rabbeinu and to actually convince him to make that change. And I thought it was an interesting insight in itself. I'd like to end with one more insight in this week's portion, is that it says, it talks about the names that Moshe Rabbeinu gave to his children. One was called Gershom. Why? Ki ger hayiti be'eretz nochi, I was a stranger in a foreign land. And which just sounds a little weird. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was born in Egypt. But it says, he named his son saying, here I'm a stranger in a foreign land. But it's not a foreign land. He knew that he was born, he knew the language, he was an Egyptian. But how can he call his son Eliezer? I'm a stranger born in a foreign land. And here we see an important lesson to all my dear Jewish brothers, that they're living outside of Israel. And we want them so badly to come and join us here in the land of Israel, because this is where they belong. God told us as the people of Israel, we have to live in Israel. And even if we were born outside the country, doesn't mean that necessarily that the country is doing you wrong. It could be a very good country and doing very good things to you, but you have to always look at it as being a foreign country. Because the only country that's not a foreign country to you is the land of Israel. And God is teaching us this lesson in this portion. And so Moshe Rabbeinu taught us. His son Gershom was born in a foreign land. Although he was born there physically, but his whole spiritual makeup comes from somewhere else completely. It comes from the land of Israel. And my dear Jewish brothers out there, you must return to the land. God is telling us. Remember, Israel is your homeland, as we have to return to. But anyway, with these couple of insights, I hope you enjoyed, and we will be back very soon. Have a great week. and we'll speak to each other very soon again. Shavua Tov. Bye bye.